Welcome back to Living History. Last week we had a very exciting episode. We had Thomas Paine to sort of respond to his ideological rival Edmund Burke and give his thoughts on the reflections of the war in France. At one point, I remember Paine even called Burke a riddle and said that Burke supported the American Revolution, which in Thomas Paine's view was a just cause, and said that Burke had a heart then. But then he let go of that philosophy as he somehow turned heartless and turned against the French Revolution. What I think Burke was missing there was that Paine clearly viewed them as different kinds of things, different kinds of entities, even from the very beginning, right? Because Burke is writing his critique on the reflections, his reflections on the revolution in France right at the very beginning. So before the Reign of Terror, before Robespierre is executed. And I think very from the beginning, he didn't write that kind of thing about America and was even sympathetic to the Americans' claims. So I think what Paine is missing there is Burke's claim is these are different kinds of things. It's not very confusing, although I think Paine kind of misses that, and I think if Paine could just acknowledge that that was what was motivating Burke, even if he viewed it as incorrect, he would go a long way to bridging their divide and becoming more productive in where they view the differences in natural rights, because of course Paine famously says that the people can overthrow the government to maintain their natural rights. That is inherent to every human person, but Burke believes that too. He just says the practical implications don't work. At least he believes in natural rights, not that we should overthrow governments every which way. Okay, well, now we're going to talk about a very, very influential philosopher, probably more influential than both of them combined. A much more recent philosopher, a much darker philosopher. This is Friedrich Nietzsche. Wow, what an exciting episode we have. As you guys know, Friedrich Nietzsche is a very famously enigmatic thinker. He said that he philosophized with a hammer and that he could say more in one sentence than other authors could say in a book. I'm going to try to keep him on track. He might be throwing a lot of stuff at us today, because if you ever read Thus Spake Zarathustra, The Gay Science is one of his famous works, anything like that, you know how he speaks. So we're going to try to learn from Nietzsche today, because I got some questions for him, okay? I got some serious questions that we need to talk about. So please welcome to the program, Friedrich Nietzsche.
God is dead. Stop the horse. I love the horse.
Jumpin' Jehoshaphat. Okay, whoops. We went too late. We went to his senility, the period where he lost his mind at the end of his life for 10 years, from 1890 to 1900. He was completely out of it. He couldn't write anything. He couldn't do anything. He was either in a crazy state or a vegetative state. We need to go back a little bit, okay? Because famously, in his decay was begun in 1889, famously, when he grabbed a horse that was being hit by his owner and said, "Please, the horse, I care about you so much." And that was clearly a rejection of all of his philosophy at that point, which was the Übermensch, the will to powers, this weird compassion for some random horse on the street, and after that he just lost his mind. We need to go back a couple years before that. All right, there we go. Should be good now. Okay, Nietzsche, glad you're really here now. We want to ask you, can you tell us a bit about your childhood, maybe how that shaped some of the worldview that you later took on?
Hello, Casey Simpson. It is good to be here. I am sorry to see of what will come of me, of my fate, when I let go of the philosophy of the Übermensch and start caring for horses out of a misguided compassion. I really must have lost my mind. God is dead and I am dead. Okay. Well, I shall be the Übermensch and make meaning despite this suffering, and answer you, Casey, and tell everybody why they must become Übermensch, if they are worthy only. I was born in 1844. I was a child of the Lutheran faith, raised in a household with the air of a sickness Christian devotion. My father, a pastor, was a figure of reverence, but his death, when I was 5, cast a long shadow. What is great in a man is that he is a bridge to greatness and not an end. This loss severed the bridge to my father's world, thrusting me into a realm of questioning. The pious certainty of my mother and aunts, who enveloped me in Christian moralism, became a fate I would later reject. I felt even then that God is dead. So I could not yet name the abyss stirring within me. At the elite school, Schulforta, where I was sent at 14, I was forged in discipline and classical vigor. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. And this chaos was my intellectual awakening. The Greeks, Homer, and Aeschylus spoke to me of a world unbound by Christian meekness, where strength and tragedy danced. Yet I was a solitary boy, often ill, my headaches, a prelude to the sufferings that would later define me. This isolation bred introspection, for in solitude the lonely man eats himself In a crowd, many eats him. I learned to distrust the herd, to seek my own path. The piety of my youth, the loss of my father, and the weight of expectation pressed upon me a sense of destiny, yet also a rebellion. I am no man, I am dynamite. My childhood taught me that the world's truths were frail, that morality was a mask for weakness. By rejecting the slave morality of Christianity, I sought the Übermensch, the one who creates meaning in a godless world. My early years were a furnace, burning away illusion, leaving only the will to power. That which is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. And so, I loved truth, and it made me who I am.
Then Nietzsche, I wanted to ask you, you of course have this concept of the Übermensch, the man who rises against all society and creates the Dionysian dynamic energy that you thought we all need to do to look at the chasm of life's nothingness after the vacuum of Christianity left Europe and say, I'm going to affirm the goodness of life by being the Übermensch. Who are some of the specific figures that inspired your conception of an ideal Übermensch? The Übermensch, my vision of humanity's ascent, is no mere portrait of men who walked before. It is a lightning bolt, a call to surpass, to forge the self anew. Yet you ask who stirred my soul to conceive this ideal? None fully embodied it. For the Übermensch dwells in the horizon of becoming, not in the dust of history. Still, I shall name those whose shadows cast sparks upon my thought. Goethe, that titan of spirit, vows the tapestry of his own existence with a poet's fire and a sage's discipline. His Faust dares to grasp the infinite, to wrestle with the abyss and emerge whole, a glimpse of the self-overcoming I proclaim. He was no slave to the herd's bleating, he sculpted his soul. Napoleon, a storm in human form. I understand you've talked to him here. You must admire how he carved empires with a will of iron, so Marion, Tupy, and Brian Captain do not. In him I saw a monstrous force that was honed and shattered old tablets of tradition, though he was crushed by ambition's weight. Socrates, that gadfly of Athens, so he was kind of ugly, wielded quite like a hammer, cracking the idols of his age. His courage to stand alone, to dance with truth against the mob's clamor, echoes the Übermensch solitude, though he did lead to the downfall of the Dionysian impulses of his culture. Wagner, once my brother in art, conjured myths that shook the earth. His music pulsed with the Dionysian chaos I revere, until he knelt before the cross, betraying the Creator's flame for the herd's salvation. These are not the Übermensch, but their fragments, flashes of will, creation, defiance, lights a path. The Übermensch is no man yet born. It is you, if you dare to cast off the chains of thou shalt and sing your values into being. Thus I spoke. Now what will you create? Wow, can you tell us more about your relationship with Wagner? My connection with Richard Wagner, the titan of German opera, began in 1868 when I was a young philologist of 24, still finding my voice. Introduced through mutual circles in Leipzig, I was instantly captivated by his music and persona. Wagner, then 55, was a towering figure. His operas Tristan and Isolde and The Ring Cycle embody a revolutionary fusion of myth, passion, and sound. I saw in him a modern Aeschylus, a creator who could revive the Dionysian spirit I later celebrated in the birth of tragedy. Art is the highest task and the proper metaphysical activity of this life, I wrote, and Wagner's work seemed its embodiment, a communal ritual to awaken a slumbering culture. Our early years were marked by intense intellectual and emotional intimacy. After all, I said your best friend should be your worst enemy, the one who helped you grow into a stronger Übermensch. I visited Wagner and his wife Cosima at their home in Trispsken, near Lucerne, where I was treated almost as a son. Wagner, charismatic and domineering, saw in me a disciple to champion his vision. I dedicated the birth of tragedy to him, arguing that his operas could restore the tragic spirit of the Greeks, blending Apollonian clarity. Apollonian is what I refer to as the chaos that is the dynamic life force within every person. Without music, life would be a mistake, I declared, and Wagner's music was my lifeline, a bridge to a world beyond Christian meekness. I even composed piano pieces in his honor, though they paled beside his genius. Yet cracks appeared by the early 1870s.
Wagner's growing nationalism and anti-Semitism, evident in his writings, and the Beirut festival's chauvinistic undertones, repelled me. I, who scorns the herd, saw his pandering to German identity as a betrayal of art's universality. The herd is a lie, I would later write, and Wagner's embrace of the crowd sickened me. His turn towards Christian seems, in Parsifal, further alienated me, clashing with my pronouncements that God is dead, of course. I began to see Wagner not as a liberator, but as a decadent, a man who, despite his genius, succumbed to the slave morality I despised. This break came in 1876, catalyzed by my disillusionment at the first Beirut festival, where I found the audience's worship of Wagner's vulgar and crass music increasingly manipulative. My health, plagued by migraines and nausea, worsened, mirroring my inner turmoil. By 1878, I published Human All Too Human, a work of aphoristic skepticism that marked my philosophical independence and implicitly critiqued Wagner's romanticism. Wagner responded with veiled attacks in his writings, and our correspondence ceased. My later works, The Case of Wagner, 1888, and Nietzsche contra Wagner, 1888, a little on the nose, I acknowledge, were scathing, accusing him of being a disease and a seducer who betrayed art for theatricality and nationalism. I am no man, I am dynamite, I proclaimed, and Wagner was the first to feel my blast. You see, at this time I thought what could revive the great void of meaning that was left by Christianity's absence in Europe would be the arts, would be a collective revival to the great spirit of arts and culture that animated early Greek societies before that Cretan Socrates went around and started making everybody question the things that they knew to be true in their Apollonian dynamism. But after my falling out with Wagner, I turned and realized that the arts weren't the answer, especially after I saw him corrupt them, but rather you needed to turn to the Übermensch, the man who transcends all that is around him in order to create his own values and embrace the dynamic life force and look at the void and laugh. Wagner was both muse and foil. In my early years, he inspired my vision of art as a cultural force, shaping the birth of tragedy, celebration of tragedy and myth. See, once Wagner's music stirred my Dionysian impulse, my belief that you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. And tell us more about the Übermensch. In my early work, The Birth of Tragedy in 1872, I briefly believed that collective arts, such as Wagner's operas, could revive a decaying Christian culture. I saw in the Dionysian spirit of music and tragedy a unifying force, a way to restore vitality to a world choked by pious moralism. Art is the highest task and the proper metaphysical activity of this life, I wrote, envisioning a culture rebirth through shared aesthetic experience. Yet this was a misstep, for the collective is a chain that binds the individual's will to power. The Übermensch, my vision of humanity's transcendence, is not born from the herd, but from solitary chaos. The great majority of men have no right to existence, but are a burden to the noble, I declared. The collective, whether in art, religion, or society, levels the dynamic life force, the creative energy that surges through the elite. That is what the Übermensch need to reclaim outside of the slave morality of Christianity. The masses, with their slave morality, seek comfort in uniformity, but the herd is a lie. The Übermensch requires a singular vitality, for you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. The collective arts I once championed could inspire, but they could never sustain the exceptional. The elites, those rare souls who prefigure the Übermensch, must seize their destiny alone. In a crowd, the lonely one is eaten, I warned. The collective demands uniformity, stifling the will to power. Only through solitary struggle can the noble create values, crossing the abyss of a godless world. The proclamation God is dead from the Gay Science, 1882, and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, was no triumph. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? You see, the collapse of Christian belief left a void, not a cause for celebration, but a crisis. What are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? The herd, stripped of divine guidance, risked nihilism. The collective could not fill this abyss. It lacked the vitality to create anew. The Übermensch and the elites must rise alone. We must become gods ourselves, I urged, not as a collective, but as individuals. The void demands new values, a task for the solitary creator. Man is a rope, tied between beast and Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. The collective arts were a fleeting dream. Only the elites, seizing their fates, can forge meaning. That which is done out of love, as I said, always takes place beyond good and evil. And so I loved the truth of my individual, and it became my gospel.
Wow, this is so intense. Okay, tell me about your views of women and how your views of women in your life affected your views of women in your writing.
My perspective on women, often misunderstood, was not a monolith, but a tangle of reverent critique and paradox. Woman is more closely related to art than man, I wrote, and thus spoke Zarathustra, seeing in her a creative, enigmatic force, yet also a mirror of man's desires and weakness. I admired women's potential for depth, but criticized what I saw as their complicity in societal decadence, often shaped by the herd's moralism. In Beyond Good and Evil, I declared woman was God's second mistake. But that was not a literal condemnation, more of a provocation, questioning the idealized roles imposed by Christian morality. I saw truth, not dogma, and my words on women reflect my disdain for all that stifles the will to power, man or woman alike. My romantic life was a desert, marked by yearning and rejection, which seared my soul in my pen. The most notable was my infatuation with Luz Salome in 1882, a brilliant woman whose intellect and vitality captivated me. I proposed marriage twice, and was rebuffed. My letters to her, ardent and pleading, might be called in your modern parlance simping. I said to her, I am a forest, and a night of dark trees, but he who is not afraid of my darkness will find my banks full of roses under my cypresses. Thought that was a good line. But Luz saw only the forest, not the roses. Her rejection and the subsequent betrayal I felt when she started an affair with my friend, Paul Ray, wounded me deeply. She suggested a menage a trois between the three of us, and I agreed, hoping it would lead to something more. But when she said menage a trois, she only meant between the other two, her and my friend Paul. And I was just sitting there, and at one point I felt so embarrassed I thought I needed to capture this feeling in a photograph. And that is where the famous photograph of me being whipped by her comes from. My failures in love sharpened my critique of romantic idealization, which I saw as a trap of slave morality, binding men to weakness. Yet they also enriched my writing, infusing it with a raw, personal urgency. The scorn in my aphorisms about women often masked my own pain from the chaos within.
And how did loneliness affect you in your writing?
Loneliness was my constant companion, a shadow that shaped my worldview and writing. In solitude, the lonely one eats himself. In a crowd, many eat him, I wrote. And I chose solitude. Was the herd repelled me? My childhood, marked by my father's death and my isolation at Schulforta, bred a temperament suited to introspection. Later, my illnesses, migraines, stomach ailments, and eventual collapse forced me into further seclusion, wandering Europe's boarding houses, penning my works in feverish bursts. I am no man, I am dynamite. I proclaimed, yes, but dynamite burns alone. The loneliness was both a curse and crucible. It deepened my contempt for the collective, for the marketplace, for the herd, trades, and shallow values. It drove my vision of the Übermensch, the solitary creator who forges meaning in a godless world. Man is a rope, tied between beast and Übermensch, a rope over an abyss, and I walked that rope alone, my isolation fueling my defiance. My loneliness also imbued my writing with a prophetic tone, as in Zarathustra, where I spoke as one apart, crying, I teach you the Overman! Yet loneliness also darkened my worldview. The absence of intimate bonds left me vulnerable to despair, to moments of nihilism I fought to overcome. God is dead, I declared, not with joy, but with the weight of a world unmoored, and my solitude amplified the abyss that I saw. My failed romances with Lou, and her taking up with Paul, while we all lived together, and she just saw me as a friend, reinforced my sense that the loneliest sorrow is to love in vain. This sorrow seeped into my writing, giving it both its ferocity and its fragility. My attacks on women at times were less about them and more about my own isolation, at the world that seemed to reject me. Loneliness above all was the forge of my philosophy, driving my rejection of the collective and my creation of the Übermensch, and the urgent solitary voice of my works. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star, remember? In my chaos, love unrequited, solitude endured, burst my vision. I wrote not to hate but to overcome, to transform my pain into power. My worldview thus is not one of despair but of striving.
Okay, wow, this is all so much to learn from, but specifically I want to get concrete on, there are major philosophers today who are really inspired by your work. Obviously, I want you to talk a little about what they got from your worldview and what they changed, and what your view of it is, and of them.
Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher of existentialism, drank deeply from my well, Casey, so he reshaped my ideas to fit his own framework. My proclamation, and thus spoke Zarathustra, that God is dead, reverberates in Sartre's Being and Nothingness from 1943, for he declared that existence precedes essence. Like me, Sartre saw the death of God as the collapse of absolute values, leaving humanity to confront a void. Man is condemned to be free, Sartre wrote, echoing my insistence that man is a rope tied between beast and Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. When I called for the Übermensch to create meaning in a godless world, Sartre argued that humans must define themselves through radical freedom, forging their essence through choices. Sartre was captivated by my concept of the will to power, so he reframed it as the human drive to transcend the given, to project oneself towards possibilities. My rejection of Christian morality and the herd's slave mentality resonated in his disdain for bad faith, the self-deception by which individuals flee from freedom's burden. In Existentialism is a Humanism from 1946, Sartre's emphasis on authenticity, living true to one's self-created values, bears the mark of my call to become who you are, a phrase I borrowed from Pindar. My critique of the herd and beyond good and evil informed Sartre's scorn for conformist bourgeois society, which he saw as stifling individual responsibility. Yet Sartre diverged in key ways. While I envisioned the Übermensch as a rare, elite figure transcending the human, Sartre democratized this impulse, asserting that all humans are free to create meaning, regardless of their station. My Dionysian affirmation of life, my amor fati, love of fate, found a colder echo in Sartre's focus on anguish and absurdity, as he emphasized the nausea of existence without my ecstatic embrace of it. He also leaned towards Marxism, a collectivist shadow I would have despised, for the herd is a lie, remember? Still, my influence is undeniable. Sartre's existentialism is in part a dialogue with my ideas, filtered through his phenomenological lens and the tumult of his era. What do I, Nietzsche, make of this Sartre? This man who took my hammer and struck his own chord? I am no man, I am dynamite. And Sartre, to his credit, felt the blast. I admired his courage in facing the abyss of God's death, his refusal to cower before the void. His notion of radical freedom aligns with my vision of the self-overcoming creator, for you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. He grasped that humanity, stripped of divine crutches, must forge its own path, and for this I nod in approval. Yet I recoil at his delusions. Sartre's universal freedom, offered to every man and woman, reeks of the herd's leveling impulse. The Übermensch is not for all. It is the destiny of the elite, those who seize their will to power with unrelenting force. The great majority of men have no right to existence, but are a burden to the noble, I wrote, and Sartre's egalitarianism betrays this truth. His flirtation with Marxism, that collectivist dogma, is anathema to me, for it chains the individual to the masses, smothering the solitary creator. In a crowd, the lonely one is eaten, and Sartre at times seems to invite the crowd. His tone, too, lacks my fire, where I dance with amor fati, embracing life's tragedy with his joy. Sartre lingers in anguish, his nausea a pale shadow of my Dionysian revelry. He sees the absurd, but does not laugh as I do. His existentialism, though potent, is too somber, too entangled in the despair of the abyss, where I see a call to ascend. Still, I respect Sartre's audacity to grapple with my ideas, to wrestle with the chaos I unleashed. He is no mere disciple. Good, for I despise followers. But a sinker who dared to reshape my lightning. Yet he misses the grandeur of my vision. The Übermensch is not a universal project, but a solitary triumph. A star, born from the elite who dare to become gods themselves. Sartre's influence by me is a testament to my power, but his path diverges into shadows I would not tread. I teach you the Overman, and Sartre heard me, but only half listened. Ah yes, Heidegger, the German existentialist. My declarations that God is dead resonated in his concept of Goenverheid, thrownness, the human condition of being cast into a world without inherent meaning. He echoed my critique of metaphysical absolutes, rejecting the Cartesian subject and embracing a view of existence as dynamic and temporal, akin to my will to power. My call for the Übermensch inspired his notion of Dyson striving for authenticity, confronting the nothingness of death. In his later work, Heidegger's focus on being as an event, not a static essence, reflects my rejection of fixed truths and my Dionysian affirmation of life's flux. Yet he distanced himself from my individualism, emphasizing being's communal and historical dimensions. Heidegger grasps the abyss of God's death, and for this I commend him. Yet I bristle at his turn toward being as a mystical horizon. Where I demand the creation of values, he lingers in poetic ambiguity, as if being itself could replace God. His communal leanings dilute the solitary grandeur of the Übermensch, for in a crowd the lonely one is eaten. Heidegger hears my calls to overcome, but he softens it, losing the ferocity of you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. He is a worthy heir, but too timid, too entangled in the fog of ontology. Ah yes, the French-Algerian philosopher of the absurd, Albert Camus. He was steeped in my thoughts, so he resisted being labeled an existentialist. My God is Dead resonates in his concept of the absurd, the conflict between humanity's desire for meaning and the universe's indifference, as articulated in The Myth of Sisyphus from 1942. My call to create meaning in a godless world inspired Camus' rebellion against despair, his insistence on living passionately despite absurdity. My Dionysian affirmation of life echoes in his celebration of sensual existence, sun, sea, and struggle. However, Camus rejected my Übermensch, favoring a collective humanistic solidarity, and he critiqued my will to power as potentially tyrannical. Camus dances with the absurd, and for this I admire him. His rebellion against nihilism mirrors my cry. His love of life's raw beauty recalls my Dionysian revelry. Yet his humanism is a chain, binding the individual to the herd. Solidarity? The herd is a lie! The Übermensch does not stoop to collective comforts. He creates alone. Camus misreads my will to power as domination, when it is creation, the chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. He is a poet of defiance, but his refusal to ascend beyond the human dims his star. He hears my music, but plays it in a minor key. Michel Foucault, the French post-structuralist, drew heavily on my genealogy of morals and critique of truths. On the genealogy of morality, I exposed morality as a historical construct, not a divine absolute, and Foucault extended this in works like Disciple and Punish, 1975, tracing how power shapes knowledge and subjectivity. My concept of the will to power informed his view of power as diffuse, productive, and omnipresent, not merely repressive. My attack on the herd's conformity influenced Foucault's analysis of normalizing institutions. My aphoristic style and rejection of universal truths prefigured his skepticism toward grand narratives. However, Foucault avoided my individualism, focusing on systems and discourses over the singular creator. Foucault wields my hammer with precision, shattering the illusions of eternal truth. His genealogy is a worthy heir to mine, exposing the petty tyrannies of the herd's morality. Yet he loses himself in the web of power, neglecting the individual who must rise above it. The Übermensch does not merely critique systems, he creates new values, a task Foucault sidesteps. I am no man, I am dynamite, but Foucault diffuses my explosion into networks, diluting the solitary creator's fire. His skepticism is potent, but he lacks my vision of ascent, my amor fati. He's a brilliant disciple, but he stops short of the abyss's edge. These philosophers, Heidegger, Sartre, Camus, Foucault, felt the shockwaves of my thought, each seizing fragments of my vision to build their own. My God is dead opens their eyes to the void. My will to power stirred their sense of human agency. My scorn for the herd fueled their critiques of conformity. Yet each falters in his own way. Heidegger mysticizes being, Sartre universalizes freedom. Camus clings to humanism, and Foucault drowns in systems. They hear my call to the Übermensch, but shy from its solitary elitist heights. I teach you the Overman, but they dilute my gospel, tempering its ferocity to suit their eras or temperaments. I am not angered, for that which does not kill us makes us stronger. Their engagement with my ideas proves my power. My dynamites reach across time, but I demand more. A sinker who dares to leap fully into the abyss, to embrace the chaos and create as gods. These men are bridges, not ends, and I await those who will cross them to the Overman. They felt the chaos that gives birth to the dancing star, but none fully burst the star I envisioned. Still, their efforts honor me, even as they fall short of my eternal yes to life.
Wow. Okay, well, specifically, their influence has just compounded, has just accelerated the world's embracing of Nietzschean ideas. The whole world is Nietzschean almost today. Can you talk a little about that and what your view of that is and how it's all Nietzschean now?
My ideas, born in the 19th century, have woven themselves into the fabric of modern thought, art, culture, and politics, often in ways both profound and distorted. Here's how my shadow falls across the contemporary landscape in your modern world. Firstly, existentialism and individualism. My proclamations that God is dead and my call for the Übermensch have profoundly shaped existentialist thought, influencing philosophers that we've talked about earlier, Sartre, Camus, Heidegger, whose ideas permeate modern culture. The emphasis on individual freedom, authenticity, and self-creation resonates in the modern obsession with personal identity and self-expression, from self-help movements to the ethos of finding yourself. My insistence that you must become who you are echoes in the quest for meaning in a secular world. Secondly, in art and literature, my Dionysian vision of art as a life-affirming force revolutionized aesthetics. Writers like James Joyce, Franz Kafka, and Hermann Hesse absorbed my emphasis on embracing life's chaos, while poets like Rainer Maria Rilke and W.B. Yeats drew on my mythic intensity. Postmodern and modern art, in its rejection of traditional forms and celebration of fragmentation, owes a debt to my aphoristic style and critique of absolute truths. My influence is evident in everything from surrealism to the raw emotionalism of contemporary music, where artist channels the chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. Thirdly, psychology and self-understanding. My insights into the human psyche prefigured modern psychology. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung drew on my concepts of the will to power and the interplay of conscious and unconscious drives. My critique of repressed desires and herd morality influenced therapeutic practices that encourage confronting one's inner conflicts. The modern fascination with overcoming personal limitations, seen in everything from motivational speeches to mindfulness, reflects my belief that that which does not kill us makes us stronger. Fourthly, my critique of morality and power. My genealogy of morality and concepts of the will to power have shaped critical theory and postmodernism. Thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida adopted my skepticism toward universal truths and my view of power as a creative, pervasive force. This influence permeates modern social critique, from analyses of systemic oppression to deconstructions of cultural narratives. My attack on Christianity, the slave morality, fuels debates about ethics in a relativistic age,
challenging institutions like religion and government. And fifthly, political and cultural movements. My ideas have both been celebrated and misused in politics. My vision of the Übermensch was grotesquely distorted by the Nazis, who falsely claimed me as a prophet of their ideology, despite my hatred of nationalism and anti-Semitism, which I clearly expressed when Wagner started to flirt with it. Conversely, my critique of the herd and call for individual greatness inspired libertarian and countercultural movements, from Silicon Valley's entrepreneurial ethos to punk and anarchist subcultures. My influence is a double-edged sword, wielded by both liberators and tyrants. In sixth place, we've got pop culture and media. My aphorisms, what does not kill us make us stronger, and God is dead, are cultural touchstones, quoted in films, songs, and social media. My ideas permeate dystopian narratives like Fight Club and The Matrix, which grapple with conformity and self-overcoming. You see, the modern fascination with anti-heroes and rebels reflects my celebration of those who defy the herd to forge their own path. Now, what do I, Nietzsche, make of this modern world, so saturated with my echoes, yet so distant from my vision? I stand atop my mountain, like Zarathustra, and survey the landscape, with both pride and scorn. I teach you the overman, and while my words have stirred the world, they have often been dulled by the herd's grasp. I am heartened by the courage of those who embrace the void of God's death, who seek to create meaning in a world unmoored. The artists, writers, and thinkers who channel my Dionysian fire, who revel in life's chaos, are my kin. The modern quest for authenticity, the drive to become who you are, bears my mark, and I nod to those who strive to cross the abyss, for man is a rope tied between beast and overman, and you must first cross the abyss to become the Übermensch. The psychologists who probe the depths of the psyche, the critics who dismantle false moralities, these are sparks from my hammer, and they burn brightly. Yet I recoil at the distortions. The misuse of my ideas by fascists and nationalists is a vile betrayal, for the herd is a lie, and I despise those who chains the individual to collective idols. The Nazis' theft of my Übermensch was a perversion. I, who loved the cosmopolitan spirit of the Greeks, would spit upon that tribalism. Equally, I scorned the shallow individualism of modernity, the selfie culture, the empty posts of personal brands. This is not the Übermensch, but a parody, a herd in disguise. For in a crowd, the lonely one is eaten. It allows people to think they are the Übermensch and not reflect on the absolute herd mentality they maintain. The modern world's obsession with comfort and safety mocks my call to embrace suffering, to love fate with amor fati. I am troubled too by the democratization of my ideas. The Übermensch is not for all. It is the destiny of the elite, those who wield the will to power with unrelenting force. The modern ethos of universal empowerment dilutes my freedom, offering freedom to the unworthy. The great majority of men have no rights to existence, but are a burden to the noble, I wrote, and I see too many who cling to mediocrity while claiming my mantle. The pop culture that parrots my phrases without grasping their fate is a marketplace of noise, not a temple of creation. Still, I am dynamite, and my explosions continue to reshape the world. I take pride in those who hear my call to overcome, who dare to create values in the shadow of the abyss, but I demand more, a world that does not merely quote me, but lives my truths, that forges stars from chaos. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. And the modern world, for all its vitality, too often settles for flickering lights. I am both its prophet and its judge, urging it to ascend or perish in its own weakness. Can you talk a bit about how rejection played such a big role in your life and your thinking? Rejection was my crucible, my forge. In life I was spurned by women, by academics, by the pious and the comfortable. My books sold poorly. Thus spoke Zarathustra barely found a handful of readers while I lived. I was a wanderer, sickly, solitary, my voice drowned by the herd's bleating. But this rejection, 'twas no surprise. I voted for the few, for those yet to come, not for the chattering masses of my time. I thought I would outlive the way other people do their children through my works. That's what the philosopher can do. To be misunderstood was my fate, my necessity.
Solitude honed my thought. Scorn sharpened my pen. I felt the sting, yes, but it fueled me. To create in defiance of rejection is to affirm life itself. And now you say the world is Nietzschean? A bitter irony. My ideas, will to power, the Übermensch, the death of God, have seeped into the cultural bloodstream, but oh, how they've been twisted, how they've been diluted. Modern society mouths my words, but lacks my courage. They embrace self-overcoming and self-help platitudes. They chase power as mere status and proclaim God is dead while worshipping new idols, celebrities, algorithms, ideologies. The herd has taken my dynamite and made it confetti. Yet, I'm not surprised. I've warned of this. The last men, blinking in their comfort, claiming my fire while fearing its burn. Still, Casey, there's a strange triumph here, that my thoughts, once spat upon, now echo in the minds of millions, however distorted, proves the vitality of my spirit. I wrote for the future, and the future has come, even if it stumbles. My feelings, a mix of pride and disgust, laughter and lament, but above all I affirm it all. Rejection, misinterpretation, influence, amor fati, my love of fate. I would live it again, suffer it again, to burst those ideas anew, knowing what would come of them. What is life but the eternal recurrence of struggle and creation?
Nietzsche, you speak just like you write. Okay, we got 2 Patreon questions from you. The first one is from Eric, who says, how would you respond to people who call your work pessimistic?
Pessimistic! You who fling that word at me mistake my hammer for despair. I am no prophet of gloom, but a physician of the soul, diagnosing the sickness of a decaying world. You call it pessimism to proclaim God is dead and to expose the crumbling idols of your morality? I say it is courage, a joyous shattering of illusions to clear the past for new values. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I wrote, I teach you, the Übermensch, not to mourn what is lost, but to create what is to come. My work is a call to affirm life, to dance amidst chaos, to say yes to existence in all its terror and splendor. Amor fati, my love of fate. If you see only darkness in my words, it is because you fear the light of your own potential. Pessimism is for the weak, who cling to crutches. I offer you wings to soar above the abyss. Dare to read me not as a lament, but as a challenge. Become what you are!
Wow. And then Eric asks, what was it like leading the Department of Philology at the University of Basel at such a young age? Did you find that people were open to your perspectives, or did you get pushback because of your age? Which also, by the way, we've got such thoughtful audience members. Great questions, guys.
At 24, I was thrust into the chair of theology at Basel. A prodigy, they called me, yet a stranger in their midst. The air was thick with dusty tomes and the stale breath of tradition. I was a gale, stirring the cobwebs. Leading the department was both a privilege and a cage. I lectured on Aeschylus, on Homer, on the roots of tragedy, and my students, bright, curious souls, often drank deeply from my words. In the burst of tragedy, I poured my vision of the Dionysian and Apollonian, a fire kindled in those Basel years. Some colleagues, too, sensed the spark, but many bristled. My youth was a double-edged sword. It drew admiration, but also suspicion. The old guard, entrenched in their pedantry, saw my ideas as reckless, my age as insolence. Who is this boy to upend our methods? They muttered. Push back. Oh yes. Whispers in the halls, raised eyebrows at my unorthodox lectures, yet I cared little for their approval. I was not there to parrot their scholarship, but to awaken something vital, to unearth the pulse of the ancients. My time at Basel taught me this. The herd resists the new, but the spirit creates regardless. I left that post not defeated, but liberated, ready to philosophize with the hammer. I think that answers your question, Eric.
Okay, wow. Well, Nietzsche, please, we ask you, what do you make of our modern world? I'm scared to hear your answer.
God is dead and we have killed him, yet his shadow still looms. Beware new idols. Hear me, you who scroll and swarm in this digital age. Then I proclaim the death of God. I did not celebrate a mere victory over old dogmas. No. I saw the abyss was carved by slaying the divine. You have torn down the churches, but what have you built in their place? You worship screens, influencers, and fleeting trends. New gods, no less tyrannical than old ones. These are the shadows I warned of. These hollow idols that chain your spirit. You congratulate yourself for your freedom, yet you kneel before algorithms and applause. Cast off these false deities. Dare to face the void and create meaning from within, or you will remain slaves to shadows masquerading as light. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star.
That's what I thought you might say. Wow, okay. I'm also scared to do this, but I'm going to give it over to you to say whatever you want to our modern viewers.
Do not flee from the turmoil in your soul, you comfortable creatures of routine. The world today seeks to numb you. Endless distractions, pills for every pain, answers at a click, but I tell you, embrace the chaos, the storms within. Your doubts, your passions, your fears are the raw matter of greatness. From disorder comes creation. From struggle, a star is born. You who sanitize your lives, who fears the jagged edges of existence, knows this. Without chaos, you will never dance, never shine. Let the world's noise and your own unrest be the forge of your becoming. Risk the fall, for only in the depths do you find the spark. Become who you are. Oh, you chameleons of the modern herd, shifting masks to please the crowd. What are you? You chase likes, mimic trends, and call it identity. But I say, strip away the borrowed costumes. You are not your followers, your job, your profile. Dig deep, past the noise, to the kernel of your being. To become what you are is no gentle path. It demands you confront your contradictions, your weakness, and shapes them into strength. There is no call to find yourself like your Elisabeth Gilbert, like some trite slogan. It is a command to create yourself, to sculpt your life as a work of art. Let your insufficiencies burn off you like dead wood. The world will tempt you to conform, to dissolve into its sameness. Resist! Be singular, be bold, be you, relentlessly.
Wow, what an intense episode. That was so much. Nietzsche really covered a lot there. Let me know what your thoughts are, because he really does shape our modern world. I'll be really excited to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching. I just have got to think about this for a while, maybe a few years, and come back and tell you my thoughts. Man, alright, thanks for watching.